Hi guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian McCollum, and today we're going to continue our look at French semi-automatic infantry rifles with the MAS 49. Now yesterday we took a look at the MAS 44, and if you haven't seen that video, it's probably not a bad idea to go back and watch it first, because this is the genesis, well, that is the genesis of where this came from. And of course, we're also filming this in conjunction with the Kickstarter pre-order release of my book on this subject, Chassepot to FAMAS, French Military Rifles, 1866 to 2016. So, if you're interested in the subject, take a look at the description text below and you can get a copy of that book ordered right now over on Kickstarter. Anyway, to pick up our story on the MAS 49 here, basically what happened was the MAS 44 was being used in combat in Indochina, and they were starting to discover not necessarily functional problems with the guns, but shortcomings of them. And so in particular, they had gotten the French had gotten this idea that they wanted the MAS 44/49 to kind of be a universal service rifle, in some ways mirroring what the Germans did with the G43 and sort of mirroring this concept that the US would have with the M14. But the idea was they wanted it to be a standard infantry rifle, for one thing, and then they also wanted it to be able to launch rifle grenades. Rifle grenades have been a long-standing part of French small arms doctrine, and the MAS 44 had no way to launch rifle grenades. And then they also wanted it to be capable of being used as a designated marksman's rifle, or actually they wanted it to be a sniper rifle. And so they wanted a way to mount a scope on it. And the MAS 44 similarly had no functionality for optics either. So there was a short production run called the MAS 44A, where they tried out some ideas of how to integrate these features, and that led directly to the MAS 49, which you'll see has a scope here, and you can't see it from that side, but there's a grenade launching apparatus on the muzzle on this side. Production would start on these in 1951, and they would actually make a total of 80,000 of them, so not an insubstantial number, and way more than they made of the MAS 44s. These would be used in Algeria and Indochina, particularly Indochina, where they were kind of a nice complement to the submachine guns and the M1 carbines that were also in wide-scale use by the French forces there. So let's go ahead and take a closer look at this, and I'll show you exactly what they changed, how they added that scope, and a few other details. The markings here are a little bit hard to read because of the matte parkerized finish, but what we have is MAS model 1949, and unlike the 44, they have now added the caliber as a marking, so caliber 7.5, and the serial number. These they have transitioned from a script font to just a block font, and these also will all be in the F series. So they started a new serial number block for the MAS 49 series. In addition, if the rifle still has its original stock on it, it will have an acceptance stamp called a roundel there, and that will tell you the specific month of acceptance when this particular individual rifle was taken into military inventory. And in this case, that is June of 1952. If we look at the muzzle end here, we can see the grenade launching hardware. So this is two parts. We have a range adjustment dial here, and we also have a grenade sight. So I can pop this sight up 45 degrees, and then I have a little notch here for a front sight, and a pair of them back here that act as a rear sight. What you would do is set the butt of the rifle on the ground and hold it basically at eye level, kneel behind it, hold it eye level, and you'd sight down these to aim the grenade. That gives you your windage, and then your range is set by this scroll wheel. So as I thread this through, it's going to extend or retract this. You slide the grenade over the muzzle of the rifle, and then this tells you your range in decameters. So add a 0, and that's how many meters you're going to be firing. The farther out on the muzzle you set the grenade, the less time it spends on the barrel and the less energy that it gets when you fire. These are propelled by blank cartridges. So maximum range on this is 260 meters, and then it can go all the way down to 80 meters. And remember, that's always fired at a 45-degree angle based on this sight. It's worth noting that where the MAS 36 and the MAS 44 had gotten rid of this early milled style of nose cap and front sight protector and gone to a stamped version, they went back to milled on the MOS 49s, and that's because with the hardware inside here for the grenade launcher, they couldn't make this as a stamped part anyway. So they already had a lot of tooling in place to make this component from the pre-war MOS 36s, and so they went ahead and used that. The same hardware here would also be used, basically the identical hardware, on the LG-48, which was one of the early grenade launching MOS 36 variants. The magazine remains identical. This wouldn't change through the entire development or the entire lifespan of this rifle family. So still the exact same 10-round magazine. And then we come to the scope. This is an APX L806 scope, which is a bit of a mouthful there. It is a 3.85 power magnified optic, and it's basically, it was heavily inspired by the German ZF4. So has kind of a unique attachment system. Let me go ahead and pull this off. The mount is also heavily inspired by the ZF4, and this one's on there really tight. Basically, you have a locking lever that compresses these two together, and what they did was add a dovetail to the side of the receiver here. I've got the bolt out of this one, but where the MOS 44 just had this smooth scalloped cut in the receiver, you can see that they have added a dovetail to the MOS 49 for optics mounting. They also changed up the style of the locking block, locking piece here on the side. So it's held in place by two screws now and serves as the stopping point for the optic instead of just being an oval block on the 44. So this dovetail would allow them to have a rifle that was in concept much like the G43 had been. Every rifle had an optics rail on it, and if you wanted to turn a rifle into a marksman's rifle, all you had to do was simply take one of the scopes, slide it on, and presto, you now have a sniper's rifle. I should point out here as well, since we're talking about sighting, one of the other issues that they decided they didn't like with the MOS 44 was this concept of non-adjustable zero, where you actually had to change out the rear sight leaf to change it zero. They decided that wasn't really so much of an advantage. Like, the logistical advantage was more of a hassle than simply letting guys zero rifles. So the MOS 49 is both windage and elevation adjustable with these little click screws. And then, of course, you still have a BDC built into it by sliding this and allowing the rear notch, the rear aperture to go up. The scope itself here is pretty simple and basically a knockoff of the ZF4, as I mentioned. Its reticle is a simple German post. Sorry, it's a little fuzzy there on camera, but you just have a central pointer. There we go. Yeah, there you go. A standard German post style of reticle. The elevation knob is a BDC, allowing adjustments in 50-meter increments out to 800. And then the windage is a covered, protected cap. And this is, I believe, also still 4 centimeters at 100-meter clicks. So a fairly coarse set of adjustments for the scope zero. Instead of traditional rings, this has an attachment method, again, not unlike the ZF4 and the G43, where you have this pair of basically sheet metal straps that wrap around the scope and this mounting cradle and tighten down on top. So here's our APX L806 designation and insignia. OPL is the company that manufactured this particular scope. There were a couple companies that made them. And then I believe the scopes were not actually serialized to the guns because they did not issue a scope with every rifle. For the record, this is the early pattern of scope mount that, well, looks like that. They would transition this to a version that actually pulls the scope a little bit forward to provide a little more appropriate eye relief on the scope. So you can see the difference right there, but this would come later. Disassembly of the MOS 49 is identical to the 44. I'm going to pull it apart just to show you a couple of the different little changes that were made. Really, in fact, the only difference on the internals is that the 44 had a somewhat lighter and spring-loaded firing pin, where the MOS 49, they got rid of the spring and they made the firing pin larger in diameter and heavier. And the idea was to make it more reliable, less likely to have light strikes. Now, French military ammunition, surplus military ammunition, is pretty well known for having very hard primers, and you can kind of see why they did that, or that developed synchronously with this heavy firing pin. So if you're shooting one of these rifles, be very aware that it's not uncommon to have doubles. If you put a loaded mag in and just drop the bolt, there is a reasonable chance that the gun will fire when the bolt slams shut, simply because the firing pin will have enough inertia to detonate a primer when the bolt comes to a stop. So this is an issue because of the primers in commercial ammunition are lighter than those in surplus military French ammunition. So there are a couple of solutions. There are commercial operations out there that make titanium firing pins, which can be the same physical size but will be lighter, and that will solve the problem. There are also companies out there that make basically a version of this firing pin for the MAS 49 and 4956 that includes a spring, and those are drop-in compatible parts. You don't have to do any modification to the rifle. You just drop in a spring-loaded firing pin, and the problem of doubling or firing when the bolt goes home will disappear. So that's a highly recommended modification or addition to make if you get one of these rifles and you do want to shoot it. All right, one last element that I want to touch on here is the sale of MAS 49 rifles to Syria. This is interesting in that it's one of very few examples of the French state arsenals actually selling rifles in bulk on export. So in 1953, Syria purchased 6,000 MAS 49 rifles. They generally are marked exactly like French rifles. Their serial numbers, they're not a continuous serial number block. They fall between 32,000 and 40,000, still in the F block. And you can just barely see it here, but they even have the standard French roundel. This one's July of 1953. In fact, the only way to distinguish them from actual French military rifles is by the bayonet. So the French had gotten rid of the bayonet on their MAS 49s, but when Syria ordered the guns, the Syrians wanted that bayonet. So the French went ahead and reinstalled bayonets on the Syrian contract guns. This is the exact same bayonet that the MAS 36 and the MAS 40 used, and that's the only difference between the French and the Syrian pattern guns. Well, I suppose that's the only direct difference. As a result of that, the handguards, the stock and handguards on the Syrian guns are slightly larger in order to fit this, the bayonet tube inside. And so the handguards are not interchangeable between the two guns. But just a real interesting version here, and something that the French did not do very often. You would think that these would be relatively easy to find, considering that it's not that hard to find a MAS 44, and there are way more of these made. However, what's interesting is very few of these were ever surplused by the French military, and finding a French military one like this is actually even harder than finding a MAS 44 in the United States. It's kind of this weird quirk of what got imported and what didn't get imported. So most of what you see here in the United States are Syrian MAS 49s that are easily distinguished because they have a bayonet, once you know to look for that, because we got importation of rifles that were surplused from Syria. That's where these came from. These rifles, the French version, never went to Syria, so they didn't end up coming here to the United States. So hopefully you guys enjoyed the video and enjoyed getting, hopefully you learned something about a different pattern of French semi-auto rifle that is, I think, vastly underappreciated in this realm of Cold War battle rifle sorts of firearms. These are extremely rugged, durable, and dependable guns, and they just don't get a whole lot of respect because I think a lot of people aren't all that familiar with them. And they're not in 7.62 NATO. So anyway, I digress. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you're interested in the subject or in small arms development in general, definitely head over to Kickstarter and check out my new book, Chassepot to FAMAS. We have details of the MAS 49 there, as well as the 44 that came before, and the 4956 that would come after, as well as every other fielded French-made military rifle for about 150 years. So it's an awesome book, gorgeous photography, tons of information, and I think you'll definitely like it. Thanks for watching.